On a tranquil Sunday afternoon at the prestigious Newport Harbor, Dr. Annalise Dubois, a senior prosecutor for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, was performing routine maintenance on her 70-foot yacht, the Althea. She was approached by Harbor Patrol Officer Caden Finch, who, acting on what he later described as a gut feeling, accused her of grand theft vessel. The encounter, captured on Finch's bodycam and multiple bystander phones, escalated into a tense standoff that ended not with an arrest, but with a career-ending revelation and a subsequent $12 million settlement against the city. This is the story of how a quiet afternoon of polishing brass fittings turned into a masterclass in constitutional law, delivered on the sun-drenched deck of a boat by the very woman the officer assumed was a common criminal. The officer's bodycam footage begins with the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the patrol boat, the engine humming at a low idle. The timestamp reads 14:32. Officer Finch adjusts the camera on his chest, a reflexive tap that sends a slight shudder through the video feed. His gaze is fixed on the sleek, white form of the Althea, a vessel whose gleaming fiberglass and polished chrome screamed of old money and weekend leisure. Moored at the end of a private dock, it was the kind of boat that usually hosted champagne brunches, not a lone black woman in grease-stained overalls and a faded university t-shirt, methodically polishing a brass cleat. To Finch, the image didn't compute. It was a dissonant chord in the otherwise harmonious symphony of wealth and privilege that was Newport Harbor. He saw not a boat owner, but an intruder, not pride of ownership, but the audacity of a thief. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, 7, Adam, 12. Show me at Dock G, slip 44. Got a possible 10 to 851, vessel theft in progress. Solo female, black, looks out of place. The dispatcher's voice crackled back, acknowledging the call, but Finch was already moving. He cut the engine and glided the last few feet to the dock, his movements filled with a practiced, almost swaggering, authority. Annalise Dubois felt the shift in the atmosphere before she heard the footsteps. The gentle rhythm of her work, the circular motion of the polishing cloth, the smell of brine and metal polish, the warmth of the California sun on her back, was her meditation, a cherished escape from the crushing weight of her professional life. She spent her weeks dismantling systems of injustice, one federal lawsuit at a time. Her Sundays were for rebuilding herself. She heard the soft thud of rubber-soled boots on the wooden planks of the dock behind her and straightened up, wiping a stray strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a faint smudge of polish. A shadow fell over her. She turned, her expression neutral, to face Officer Caden Finch. He was younger than she expected, with a military-style haircut and eyes that seemed to be in a perpetual state of suspicious squinting. His hand was resting casually, perhaps too casually, on the grip of his sidearm. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he began, his tone a carefully calibrated blend of feigned politeness and implicit command. "This your boat?" Annalise offered a small, tired smile. It was a question she'd grown accustomed to, in various forms, in yacht clubs, marina stores, and even from fellow boat owners. "It is," she said simply, just giving her a little TLC. "Can I help you, officer?" Finch's eyes roamed from her face, down her stained overalls, to the bucket of cleaning supplies at her feet, and then across the expansive deck of the Althea. The name was elegantly scripted in gold leaf on the transom. His gaze lingered there for a moment before returning to her. "I'm Officer Finch, Harbor Patrol," he said, puffing his chest out slightly. "We had a call about suspicious activity in this area. Someone fitting your description on a boat they didn't belong on." Annalise's internal alarms, honed by years of navigating racially charged encounters both personally and professionally, began to chime softly. "A call," she repeated, her voice steady. "From whom?" "I've been here since sunrise. The only other person on this dock was Mr. Henderson from the Salty Dog next door, and he left for his fishing trip hours ago." Finch ignored the question. "I'm going to need you to step off the vessel and onto the dock, ma'am," he ordered. The "ma'am" was a paper-thin veneer over the steel of his command. "We need to verify ownership." The request was an order, and they both knew it. Annalise felt a familiar weariness settle into her bones. It was the exhaustion of having to constantly prove her belonging, of having her very presence treated as a provocation. But her training, both as a litigator and as a black woman in America, took over. Composure was her shield. "Officer," she began, her tone remaining even, "I'm happy to cooperate, but I'm in the middle of a task. The registration and my identification are in the main cabin. I can go retrieve them for you." She made a small gesture toward the companionway stairs leading below deck. Finch's posture stiffened instantly. He took a half-step forward, his hand moving from his sidearm to his taser. "Negative," he snapped, his voice losing all pretense of civility. "You're not going anywhere unsupervised. For all I know, you could be going for a weapon or trying to scuttle the evidence. You will step off the boat now, and I will escort you to retrieve the documents." The absurdity of the statement, the idea that she would scuttle her own multi-million-dollar yacht, was almost laughable, but the menace in his voice was not. This was no longer a simple inquiry. It was a confrontation. He was creating a narrative of danger to justify his aggression. Around them, the quiet Sunday afternoon was being disturbed. A man walking his poodle on the main promenade paused, his curiosity piqued. On a neighboring boat, a couple who had been enjoying cocktails on their aft deck lowered their glasses, their conversation ceasing. The silent audience was beginning to assemble. Annalise stood her ground, her feet planted firmly on the deck of the boat she had purchased with the fruits of a career dedicated to upholding the very laws this officer was now preparing to trample. "Officer Finch," she said, her voice dropping slightly, gaining a new resonance of authority, "you are currently on a private dock, addressing me on my private property. You have articulated no reasonable suspicion of a crime. You mentioned a call, but you haven't provided any details. A vague description is not sufficient grounds to detain me or to board my vessel." Finch let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a sound of pure derision. "Oh, a sea lawyer, are we? I've dealt with your type before. Think you can spout a few lines you saw on TV and make me back down?" He unclipped his radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch, subject is uncooperative. Resisting investigation." He was escalating the situation for the official record, building his case for what he intended to do next. He looked back at her, his eyes hard. "Here's how this is going to go. Either you step off this boat and we verify ownership, or I'm going to place you under arrest for obstruction of justice, and this boat gets impounded as evidence. Once it's in our custody, we'll get a warrant and tear it apart looking for the real owner's information. Your choice." Simple, the threat was disproportionate, a tactical nuke for a parking ticket offense. It was designed to terrify, to compel compliance through fear. But Annalise was not easily terrified. She had faced down corrupt police chiefs in federal court and cross-examined hostile witnesses with far more menace than this puffed-up patrolman could ever muster. She recognized the tactic for what it was, a bully's bluff. "Tearing apart a $45 million vessel seems like a rather expensive way to check a registration that I have offered to provide," she stated calmly, deliberately correcting his unspoken, and likely much lower, valuation of her property. Furthermore, impounding it would constitute an unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment, as you lack the probable cause necessary to believe a crime has been committed. Your gut feeling that I look out of place is not probable cause, officer. It's a textbook example of racial bias, and it will not hold up in court." She spoke the words with the precision of a surgeon, each syllable a carefully placed incision into his flimsy pretext. The legal terminology wasn't for show, it was a warning. It was the first hint that he was not dealing with the person he thought he was. The man with the poodle had stopped walking and was now watching intently. A teenager on a skateboard, drawn by the raised voices, had his phone out, the red dot of the recording button a tiny, accusatory eye. The mention of racial bias seemed to flick a switch in Finch. His face, already tight with aggression, hardened into a mask of indignant fury. "Now you're playing the race card?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Unbelievable. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with a suspicious person on a boat they probably can't afford. It's my job to investigate that." He took another step, planting his foot on the edge of her boat, a clear physical intrusion. "I'm done talking. Last chance. Get off the boat." Annalise knew the conversation had reached its inflection point. De-escalation had failed. Logic had failed. She had given him every opportunity to walk back from the precipice, and he had chosen to leap. "Very well." She let out a slow, deliberate breath. "All right, officer," she said, her tone shifting from patient explanation to one of weary resignation. You're compelling me to act. She reached not for the companionway, but for the small, weathered leather satchel sitting on a deck chair. Finch tensed immediately. Don't move. Show me your hands, he yelled, his hand now firmly gripping his taser, his knuckles white. Annalise moved with deliberate slowness, keeping her hands visible at all times. My wallet is in the bag, officer. I'm going to retrieve my identification, she said, her voice a low, calming murmur, the kind one might use on a spooked animal. She unzipped the bag and slowly pulled out a simple, worn leather wallet. Finch watched her every move, his body coiled like a spring. He expected a driver's license, something to run through his system. He was prepared to find it was fake, or that it didn't match any registered owner. Annalise opened the wallet, but she bypassed the plastic slot where her driver's license was. Instead, she extracted a stiff, cream-colored card. She held it out to him. As I mentioned, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, I am an attorney. Finch squinted at the card. He saw her name, Dr. Annalise Dubois, ESQ, and below it, the official crest of the California State Bar. For a fleeting second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. This complicated his narrative, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. A lawyer, he scoffed, trying to regain the upper hand. That doesn't mean you didn't steal a boat. I've arrested lawyers before. Some of them are the biggest crooks of all. The dismissal of her professional standing was the final confirmation Annalise needed. He was not just mistaken. He was committed to his prejudice. The small crowd on the dock had grown. The couple from the neighboring boat were now standing at their railing, phones held aloft. The bodycam footage would later show at least 4 separate mobile devices recording the encounter from different angles. The public trial had already begun. You are correct, officer, Annalise agreed, her voice still unervingly calm. My status as an attorney does not, in itself, prove ownership of this vessel. It was merely intended as a professional courtesy, a signal that I am aware of my rights and your obligations. An advisory which you have chosen to ignore. She tucked the bar card away. Finch, emboldened by his own dismissiveness, saw this as a retreat. He moved to close the distance, his intent clear. That's it. I'm done with this. You are being detained for investigation of grand theft. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. He reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the suddenly silent marina. But Annalise didn't move. She simply held up a hand, a gesture that was not pleading but commanding. Detaining me would be a profound, career-altering mistake, Officer Finch, she said, her voice now carrying an icy weight that cut through the warm air. I strongly advise you to reconsider that course of action. Her eyes, which had been patient and weary, were now sharp and focused, like a predator locking onto its prey. She reached back into her satchel, her movements still slow and deliberate. You seem to be under the impression that I am some sort of public defender or ambulance chaser, she said, her voice low and resonant. Let me correct that misapprehension for you. She pulled out a second wallet, this one a stern, official-looking black leather case. She flipped it open. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license or a bar card, but a government credential, emblazoned with the imposing seal of an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch. Finch froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his cuffs, stopped midair. Annalise held the credentials out for him to see clearly. The bodycam lens zoomed in, capturing the details in stark, unforgiving high definition. Her photograph, her name, Dr. Annalise Dubois. And beneath it, the words that would unravel his entire world: Senior Trial Attorney, United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the quiet that had preceded it. The lapping of the water, the distant cry of a gull, the hum of the marina, it all faded away, replaced by the deafening sound of a power dynamic shattering into a million pieces. Officer Finch's face, captured in grainy detail by his own camera, went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, sheer, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. His jaw worked silently, but no sound emerged. He looked from the imposing gold seal on the ID to Annalise's unblinking eyes and back again. That That can't be, he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper, all the previous bluster and arrogance gone, evaporated like sea spray on hot asphalt. The Civil Rights Division. He wasn't just harassing a citizen. He was harassing a federal prosecutor. Not just any federal prosecutor, but one from the specific division of the Department of Justice that investigated and prosecuted cops like him for misconduct. He had, in the space of 10 minutes, created a perfect, self-contained case study for the very person whose job it was to make examples of officers who abused their power. The bitter, crushing irony of the situation settled on him like a physical weight. He began to backpedal, both literally and figuratively. He took a clumsy step back onto the dock, his foot nearly slipping off the edge. "Ma'am, Dr. Du Bois, listen," he pleaded, his hands now held up in a placating gesture, a mirror image of the command she had given him moments before. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. My apologies. I was just following procedure." Annalise slowly retracted her credentials, snapping the leather case shut with a sharp, final click. The sound made Finch flinch. When she spoke again, her voice was transformed. The warmth, the patience, the weariness, all gone. It was now the voice she used in federal courtrooms. A voice of pure, cold, unassailable authority. A voice that dismantled lies and laid bare the truth. "There has been no misunderstanding, Officer Finch," she stated, each word a hammer blow. "You saw a black woman on an expensive boat and your immediate, unshakable conclusion was that she must be a thief. That is not a misunderstanding, it is prejudice. You did not follow procedure," Annalise continued, her voice cutting and precise. "You ignored my offer to provide documentation. You rejected my assertion of my Fourth Amendment rights. You threatened me with an unlawful arrest and the illegal seizure of my private property. You escalated a situation based on nothing more than your own biased assumptions. Standard procedure requires reasonable, articulable suspicion. You had none. What you had was a racist gut feeling, and you chose to act on it." She gestured toward the body camera on his chest. "Fortunately, your actions, your threats, and your justification, or lack thereof, are all preserved on this recording. As they are," she added, with a sweeping glance at the dock, "on at least 4 other devices that I can see from here." Finch's eyes darted around, following her gaze. He saw the phones, all still pointed at him. He saw the faces of the bystanders, no longer curious, but openly hostile and judgmental. He was no longer the enforcer of the law. He was the spectacle. He was the villain in a story that was already being uploaded to the cloud. His panic began to curdle into desperation. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I have a family. I can get my supervisor down here. We can sort this out." Annalise's expression remained implacable. "You will get your supervisor," she commanded, not requested. "But not to sort this out. You will have him respond to this location to take a formal complaint regarding your conduct. Provide me with your name and badge number." Now, it was a direct order, and Finch, his authority completely stripped away, complied without hesitation. "Finch. Caden Finch. Badge number 724, he recited, his voice hollow. He fumbled for his radio, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. "Dispatch. 7, Adam, 12. Send a supervisor to my location. Doc G, slip 44. It's a civilian complaint," the dispatcher, likely sensing the stress in his voice, confirmed the request. The wait for the supervisor was excruciating. Finch stood rooted to the spot on the dock, a statue of disgrace. Annalise remained on her deck, a silent, powerful figure of judgment. The bystanders didn't leave, they stayed, bearing witness. The air was thick with the unsaid, with the career that had just imploded, with the lawsuit that was already being mentally drafted. The supervisor, a portly sergeant named Peterson with tired eyes and a drooping mustache, arrived looking more annoyed than concerned, a disposition that changed the moment he saw the scene. He saw a subordinate who looked like he'd seen a ghost, a crowd of onlookers filming with their phones, and a woman on the deck of a magnificent yacht who radiated an aura of formidable calm. "What's going on here, Finch?" the sergeant asked, his voice low and gravelly. Before Finch could stammer out a response, Annalise spoke. "Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying easily across the water. "I am Dr. Annalise Du Bois. Your officer, Caden Finch, badge number 724, just attempted to illegally detain me and seize my vessel on the suspicion that I had stolen it." She paused, letting the words sink in. His sole basis for this suspicion, by his own admission, was that I am a black woman on a boat he felt I couldn't afford. Sergeant Peterson's face tightened. This was bad. Very bad. He threatened to arrest me for obstruction when I asserted my constitutional rights. Annalise continued, her recitation of facts as dispassionate as if she were reading an indictment in court. He refused my offer to produce the ship's registration and my identification, insisting on an illegal, escorted search of my cabin. He was in the process of attempting a false arrest when I was forced to present my federal credentials. She held up the black leather case again. I am a senior trial attorney with the United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Peterson physically recoiled, as if he'd been struck. The words DOJ and civil rights are a combination that strikes fear into the heart of every police supervisor. He shot a venomous glare at Finch, who seemed to shrink under the weight of it. "Sergeant," Annalise said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, "I am filing a formal complaint against Officer Finch for racial profiling, attempted illegal search and seizure, and attempted false arrest, constituting gross official misconduct and multiple violations of my civil rights under color of law. I want his bodycam footage preserved as evidence. I will also be requesting all dispatch logs and radio traffic related to this incident. My office will be in contact with your department's chief, the city attorney, and the Civilian Review Board tomorrow morning to discuss this incident and the potential for a pattern or practice investigation into your harbor patrol unit." The fallout was swift and brutal. Officer Caden Finch was placed on immediate administrative leave. Sergeant Peterson, after offering a profuse and fumbling apology that Annalise coolly accepted without comment, personally escorted Finch from the marina, his career in shambles. The videos, as expected, went viral within hours. Uploaded with titles like "Racist Cop Accuses DOJ Prosecutor of Stealing Her Own Yacht," the footage became a national news story. The shaky phone videos, combined with the crystal-clear bodycam footage which was leaked a day later, painted an undeniable picture of abuse of power. The Harbor Police Department, facing a public relations nightmare and the looming threat of a federal investigation led by the very victim of their officer's misconduct, moved with uncharacteristic speed. Finch was fired within the week, following an internal affairs investigation that was less an inquiry and more a formality. The city's attorneys, recognizing the catastrophic legal jeopardy they were in, reached out to Annalise immediately. They knew that a lawsuit filed by a top DOJ civil rights lawyer, alleging civil rights violations against herself, was unwinnable. A trial would be a public crucifixion. They offered to settle. Annalise, represented by a private firm to avoid a conflict of interest with her own department, accepted. The city paid a $12 million settlement, one of the largest in its history for a non-physical injury case. In a press conference held on the steps of the courthouse, Annalise stood not as a victim, but as an advocate. "This incident was not, ultimately, about me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It was not about a boat or a belligerent officer. It was about the presumption of criminality that is placed upon black and brown people in this country every single day. I had the credentials, the resources, and the knowledge of the law to defend myself. Most people who look like me, in that same situation, do not. This settlement is not a victory for me. It is a message to every police department that the cost of prejudice is high, and that accountability, one way or another, will come later that week." Under the same brilliant sun, Annalise was back on the deck of the Althea. The brass was gleaming, the water was calm, and a profound quiet had settled over the harbor. The settlement money would be donated, in its entirety, to a nonprofit organization that provided legal aid to victims of police misconduct. For her, the vindication was not in the money, but in the silence. It was the silence of an afternoon uninterrupted, the quiet dignity of being left alone, the simple, hard-won peace of enjoying what was hers.